Hi everyone, Liberty Down Under here. We've got a great show for you guys today. It's so great, in fact, we've put it into two separate parts. In this episode, episode number 6, CentristOzzy and I were joined by PoliBard from Twitter to talk about corruption in Victoria, in particular focusing on the IBAC proceedings and also on the ICook investigation, or as it is more commonly referred to, Sluggate. Apologies to the audio-only listeners of this show. There are some graphics involved in the podcast, in particular involving the slug in Sluggate. It's one of the most key pieces of evidence from the investigation, so I'll be putting a link to that in the podcast description so you guys can go and check out that photo because it is really useful to refer to for this case. And in the next episode, episode number 7, PoliBard and I will continue a conversation talking about a variety of topics, but in particular we'll be focusing on the brutality of the Victorian police and not just to the protesters. There is a great story here which you guys cannot miss. It is one of the most brutal stories we've heard from Victorian police within the last 20 months, but it is not linked to the COVID protesters, so you probably wouldn't have heard about it yet. So, enjoy. All right, hello and welcome back to the Country of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, Liberty Down Under, and with me today I've got CentristOzzy back again, and our new guest, PoliBard.
Hey guys.
So I thought what we'd do today is, for episode 6, is to follow on from our last episode, episode 5. We looked at corruption and lobbying in Australian politics in general, but at the end of that show, we talked a bit about IBAC and ICAC, and I thought we'd go really into detail with that today. And we've got PoliBard on to talk about IBAC and the corruption in Victoria that's recently come out in the last few months. So I guess I'll give you the floor to, tell us who the important figures are and give us any definitions before we start talking in detail about it.
Okay, sure. Well, we'll get all the names up at the start. I think June 2020, last year, when 60 Minutes and The Age did a cooperative investigation into branch stacking within the Victorian ALP, and they placed bugs in the office of federal MP Anthony Byrne, and there were a lot of meetings in there involving the moderate right faction of the Labor Party. So there's two big factions, as far as I understand it. I do not give a stuff how Labor organise themselves internally, so you'll have to forgive me for not being across this, but I believe there's broadly the socialist left and the moderate right, and I think at times during the past, some minor factions have been absorbed into these two factions, but these are the two big factions as I understand it. And so you had Anthony Byrne, who, being in federal politics but still in the Labor Party, was in this, but it was really all about the activities of the Victorian MPs and staff. And so you had Adam Somyurek, who is definitely a huge power broker within the ALP. He has huge control over pre-selection and so forth. And he was working in cahoots with Marlene Kairouz, another MP, and also Robin Scott. So though the fallout from the story was that Adam Somyurek got sacked the next day, Daniel Andrews had a press conference. The journalists wanted to know why Kairouz and Scott weren't sacked, and Dan basically said, well, they said they weren't involved and I believed them, and then 2 days later they both got sacked as well. And from that, an IBAC investigation was launched into the whole thing. It's called Operation Watts. And that's been operating for, I think it's in its 3rd week now, although that's, as far as public hearings go, I think there's been a lot of hearings that we haven't been privy to, and they may have started earlier, and they've been happening non-publicly during that time. And so far what we've seen is we haven't seen any MPs. We've basically, except for Anthony Byrne, of course, who was he was the first witness, and he was very, very candid in his testimony, very thorough, had a good understanding, seemed to have a bit of a falling out with Somyurek. I think initially Byrne was the master and Somyurek was the apprentice, and then I think there was a bit of a role switch at some point where Adam took over and became the power monger. And I think Byrne might have got a bit scared of him at that point. Not really sure. He says he was, but, you know, they're all sort of dobbing each other in to make themselves look a bit better. So it's a bit hard to read into that.
So, Polly, the main accusations is that it's branch stacking, correct?
Yes and no. IBAC's investigating branch stacking to uncover actual crime, because branch stacking is not a crime as such. It's against the Labor Party rules, and the commissioner actually referred to as far back as 1999, I think. Mark Dreyfus, who I believe is the shadow attorney general at the moment. He wrote a report into branch stacking and made some recommendations.
Before we go too far, do you want to just give us a quick breakdown for those listening, what exactly branch stacking is? Because I know even a lot of Australians probably struggle to know what it is. I know I had to look it up when I first learnt about it. So do you want to give us a rundown from your impression at what you understand it to be?
Yep. So it's basically it's a corruption of the internal democratic processes of a political party, where numbers are shifted around to create power bases where they don't exist. So they basically stack branches with members who are loyal to somebody so they can take over a branch. And then once they take over a branch, they can put their own people in and so on to control the pre-selections and, you know, the admin and all that kind of stuff.
So they do this via paying for members' fees. Is that correct?
There's a couple of different things involved with it. One is that they have this thing called warehousing of members, where they get members to sign up, not assigned to a particular branch, and then they shunt them into a branch when they need numbers to take it over. And the other one that they've got, which this is the most common one, is that they have non-genuine members. And I think this is where the Age and 60 Minutes really blew the story open. Was they discovered a few non-genuine members, went and confronted them, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know, I know nothing, you know." And the Australian Labor Party took over the admin of the Victorian Labor Party, and they did an audit on the members, and basically a quarter of them were deemed to be not genuine members. I can't remember whether it was 3,000 out of 12,000 or 4,000 out of 16,000. It was quite a substantial number, and the Liberal Party had a similar audit too, and they uncovered, I think, 170. You know, which is significant, but not really troubling.
So with those 3,000, basically what you're saying is that those 3,000 fake members technically can be used to persuade certain political ideology within the party in order to make it. Is that sort of the idea of branch stacking, to get their ideas across?
Yeah, it's sort of, it's like it's a power grab thing, like the little factional sub chiefs want to accumulate more power, and the more members you've got, the more power you've got, because the members all get a vote. So they get to vote on things like the National Conference, the Labor's National Conference, where they elect people to the National Executive, and the National Executive can change rules. So, if you want a rule change, you've got to stack the National Executive. And the other thing that they do is get people pre-selected, because the Labor Party rules are such that when they vote on who will be the candidate that gets pre-selected to go on the ticket in an election, 50% of the vote comes from the members, and 50% comes from the POSC, which is the Public Office Selection Committee. So those two votes are combined, and then the winner goes on the ticket. But also, as part of branch stacking, it enables you to put people into the Public Office Selection Committee. So you now have you're coming at the problem from both sides of that 50%. So you can increase your power to get people pre-selected. that make sense?
So when you say disingenuine, so when you're talking about members being disingenuine or whatever, does that mean that someone's paying for their membership fees, but they're not actually, you know, the person does not know that they're in the party? How does that work?
Yeah, as far as non-genuine members, there's a bit of grey area here, and some of the witnesses at IBAC were a bit reluctant to get too specific on it, but it seems that it's a reasonable assumption to assume that a non-genuine member is not paying for their own membership, and that's actually against party rules. That was something that was implemented quite a while ago because it enables branch stacking to have people. Now, there was also a bit of sort of cloud thrown around that some witnesses did it more than others. Oh, no, they're genuine, but there were hardship reasons why they couldn't pay their membership, so other people paid for them. And sometimes, they paid us back, but I think, in most cases where people weren't paying for their own membership and never paid for it, they're non-genuine members. Now, some of them were cooperatively non-genuine, in that, they were quite happy to receive forms and forward them on and all that kind of stuff. There were probably others that really weren't even aware of the fact that they were members, or they didn't understand what it was.
Oh, wow.
They just thought it was like being a member in a club. They didn't understand that there's actually rights and obligations that went with that membership. And they were probably just, because a lot of these people are migrants, so they probably really didn't understand the situation they were in at all. And they were being, they call them captains, they have like team captains. And these team captains were responsible for, collecting the ballots and getting membership forms signed and resent and so forth. And there was a lot of fraud went on during this as well. And the fraud aspect really kind of spells out exactly how non-genuine some of these members were. Like there's a definite possibility that some people had no idea that they were members or that there was paperwork being filled in on their behalf. I think it was done in a lot of cases for expediency, rather than they couldn't have got the signature. They just did it because, they wanted it done in a hurry because memberships were closing or nominations were closing, and stuff like that. So
are these people, like, say the non-genuines who didn't know, so give them the benefit of the doubt and they don't know, are those people liable for charges or anything? Like, is this how serious can this get? Is it like, can they get charged for fraud or anything like that?
I don't think so. If they weren't signing any forms or anything, I don't think there could be any legal blowback on them. They may, well, in fact, they probably have been booted out of the Labor Party, or at least those memberships have been cancelled. Now, I would imagine that there might be some sanctions that Labor's got. Labor may put conditions that they can never join the party again. I don't know, just because they don't want to go there and they don't want the stink, because of these people that have been named before. As far as legally, I'm struggling. Like, if they weren't cooperating and they weren't actively involved, I'm struggling to think of what the police could ping them on.
Well, I was more thinking, like, if they did sign, like, say someone, the captain that you referred to, came round to the house and said, hey, we're in this, you're part of this, sign this paper here, and they've signed it, trusting the person who's asked them, then I suppose you could get done for fraud. But that's why I'm asking, because I'd like to know if the actions from the political party actually put the people at risk who, like I said, the benefit of the doubt for the people who don't necessarily know that they're involved in something they probably shouldn't be involved in, and whether or not there's going to be some scapegoats for the party.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And I hadn't thought of it before because I've been sort of focused on the people who are actually doing all the dirty stuff. I would think not. And also I think, like, they're not going to bother, I would say, because, I mean, well, it's Victoria. You can kill 801 people and the police don't even bloody get involved, Work so, we might charge your department. You can steal 400 grand with your red shirts mates and the police, or nothing to see here, So as far as that goes, there's no way anyone's getting charged. But as far as technically, have they committed any crimes, I would imagine the vast majority of them haven't. There may have been some non-genuine members who were like deputised by the captains to do some of the legwork for some of the other non-genuine members. They might have technically done something a little bit naughty, but I think in any case, most of these people would have no case to answer for at all.
Good.
Some of them may have a case to answer with the ALP, and like all they can do is basically penalise you if you stay a member or boot you out. So if you quit the party, there's effectively no sanction. And AEC, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how much the AEC has to do with like party politics rather than.
So when it comes to fraud, because fraud doesn't cover, like, there's no laws on internal party politics. So branch stacking is technically legal because it's internal party policy. However, lying to the AEC about membership numbers is fraud.
Yeah,
so,
and I
the
think
party
also
is possible in trouble.
The party can be liable for fraud, but people themselves they're innocent people. They're not committing any crime. The party is, but not the people.
No, I think some of the people who forged the signatures, they're probably going to be in big trouble.
Yeah,
but
the
if
vast
you
majority
hand a form to someone knowing that it's going to be forged, I don't know whether they can get you on some kind of conspiracy, or assisting fraud. I'm not sure, but I don't think many of these non-genuine members are going to get much grief unless they are actively involved. In which case, well, they probably would have been made active members.
Yeah,
because they may have been told, look, become an active member, become a captain, recruit some people. We can either get you in on one of these bloody scam jobs where you do no work and you get paid, or do you want to get into politics? So I think that most of the non-genuine members would have had absolutely nothing to do with being in the party. They were just basically names and addresses that they could take advantage of.
Cool. So, okay, that's good. Like, it's just interesting to know that sort of background, because you sort of expect politics to scapegoat. So it's good to know that maybe the people in the bottom end aren't going to get screwed over. So who are we on to then? So the big players, like you were saying, I think it was Somyurek who got fired, and then we had the other two get sacked. Whereabouts are we sitting with this IBAC?
I think our spread, I'm not quite sure where Robin Scott's constituency is, but Kairou's is like the western suburbs, and Somyurek is southeast suburbs. So it's exactly the same area as Daniel Andrews, but the opposite faction. And there hasn't been any real serious mention of the socialist left faction. They certainly haven't interviewed anybody from the socialist left faction yet. So I don't know whether that's to come, or whether the focus is on the people that got dobbed in with huge evidence, on the Sunday night media. That's definitely the focus of everything so far, from what I can tell.
So I've got to hear Robin Scott is Preston, so central Melbourne.
Okay, yep. Yeah, well, that makes sense, actually, because that's near to Heidelberg, where Garotti was, and then he's the mayor of Heidelberg, who had quite a lot of fingers and quite a lot of pies as far as branch stacking goes, and seems he was fairly active for Somyurek and fairly trusted, I'd say, as well, and a bit of a go-getter too. I think he was probably headed for state politics at one point, at least. But yeah, I think he's finished now. He just tried to be too cute on the first day, and they burned him. So, do you want to talk about that one particular case? Because if we talk about Garotti, we can sort of uncover all of the different layers, and it's probably a lot easier to understand the scams as a whole. And then I can talk about some of the other people and some of the names that have got mentioned, but essentially the behaviours and the crimes are the same over and over from each witness. But Garotti was a good one because he really sort of opened a can of worms about the ethnic angle, like the ethnic communities that Labor were exploiting in their branch stacking.
Sure, let's start with him then. That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. So he was basically in cahoots with another guy called Hussein Harako, and he ran this organization called SACOV, which is the sorry, what's the pseudonym? Hang on.
It's
the Somali Australian Council of Victoria. So it's on face value, it's a community group that's set up to assist Somalis with becoming Australian and all that kind of good stuff. So what he was doing is he had this Harako guy was recruiting through the Somali Association and putting new members through and joining them essentially to the moderate right faction under Garotti and under Somyurek. So they were like building this huge power base of members, and one problem they ran into was that, like, at a particular branch, you couldn't add more than, I think, 6 or 7 members in a meeting, and the meetings were once a month, and you could add 13 if you asked permission to have a special meeting. So they were like, siphoning people off to other branches. They had spreadsheets, and they knew everywhere that had gaps. So they'd put these people on other branches, and then after they joined at a different branch, they'd transfer them to the branch they wanted them in, because there was no monthly limit on the number of people that could transfer from one branch to another. But joining up at a branch registered at that branch, there were limits, and those limits were put in to stop branch stacking. So this is one of the ways they were able to get around branch stacking rules.
I guess we should also note that SAVIC was also funded partly by Kairos's, when she was Minister for Gaming. She gave a grant of $75,000 to SAVIC as well. So she was involved. That was 2019, I think.
Yeah,
that she was giving them funding. So it goes back a while. Yeah,
they got a lot of money out of that, and that particular one, IBAC drilled into in a fair bit of detail, and they kind of dumped. They kind of, thought they sort of let Garotti think that they were really interested in this one thing they had info on, and then they dumped on him that they had several years of info and dirt that that was really kind of broke him. That, but there was a $75,000 grant, and I believe it was something to do with problem gambling.
Yes, it was because she was Minister for Gaming, so it came from gambling prevention.
Yeah, so
the gambling prevention program
for the Somali community. It was what the grant was awarded for. I believe it was specifically awarded in this case, and so they had the receipts breakdown. It was like 56,000 in salary and 7,000 in advertising and 4,000 in video production and all this, and anyway, IBAC basically proved that just about every cent of this grant went to this Harako guy. And what they would do is, apart from it just being pure, graft, is that they would use some of this money to purchase Labor memberships. As soon as you can identify someone, if you can pay for their membership, well, you've got another player in your faction. And this is how they sort of take over. And the money involved it's not a lot. I think memberships go between $30 and $100. There's all kinds of discounts. I think pensioners were the cheapest, and then I think union members were the next cheapest, and a full one I think was $100. But of course, they're signing them up as the cheapest possible memberships they could get them on, so they could get more members. So all they needed was the main thing was it's got to be a registered voter, got to be on the AEC electoral roll. That was all they needed, and most people are, because it's compulsory to vote. So they had a huge pool of people to go and potentially sign up, whether they were interested or not.
And on top of that, IBAC had the receipts as well, because of basically everything that this group was doing was dodgy when it comes to finances. They were double counting expenses, so they would the computer was it was a $2,000 computer, and they had an invoice, and they gave the invoice to the council and to the Victorian government, so they got paid $4,000 for a $2,000 computer, and then they used the extra money, the extra $2,000 to pay for memberships and do branch stacking.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I can find it. I'll see if I can find it in the summary. They I think they identified out of $1 million total in grants, 400,000 of it was claimed twice. They didn't go into, they went into the $75,000 grant in a great amount of detail, and then at the end they dumped the whole figures, rather than go through everything case by case. I think they were just trying to show him, this is how detailed we've investigated this, and would it surprise you to learn that, it's because this guy Garotti, he was organising council grants for Sakov as well. So they were getting grants off the state government and off the council as well. Although he claimed that he didn't have anything to do with that, and he knew it was a conflict of interest, and he stepped back from that process. And he might have, made one or two inquiries, but he didn't push it, which he probably didn't, because it would have looked really bad. It might have drawn attention to the other grant. So he probably was being pretty genuine there when he said, I didn't really have anything to do with that grant. But he may have also tipped off Harako in particular on how to apply for that grant in the most successful manner. And another thing that came out too was that they were competing with another one from was that Jenny Macklin's electorate. There was a competing ethnic group trying to get the same grant money, and they were trying to push theirs down and boost theirs up. They were getting inside information, and they were actually going up in over the top to ministers using their own contacts to try and facilitate grant decisions being made a certain way.
The second group was they were innocent, right? That second group you're talking about there, the second ethnic group.
I don't know. They sort of didn't go there, and possibly they didn't investigate them. So I think that's unknown. So you give them the benefit of the doubt, I guess. But given how much evidence has come out of how much bad stuff Labor's been up to, and they were all doing it, I'd be interested to give them a second look. If I was, an investigator, I might be asking for their books, just to see if there is anything else there, because it seems to be a very common thread that these people have been, just scamming whatever they possibly can. They've got scams on their scams on their scams. It's quite extraordinary when you hear it all come out. There's one in the Burns case, I think they were talking about, I think it was Burns staffer. They stole $15,000 worth of stamps, and they organised to order the stamps progressively over 6 months so that it wouldn't appear suspicious. And then they dumped all the stamps into a big mail-out campaign for one of their candidates, and it's stamps, so they're anonymous. So, nobody, if you didn't notice the amounts, you're never going to pick up stuff like that. So they're very, very skilled operators at hiding their crimes, that's for sure.
Well, because of the branch stacking, they had ministers in the right places. Because you had Kyra's was gaming minister, then you had Scott was multicultural affairs minister, and then they had Somyurek in the upper house to support them. So they were all used their branch stacking, the original branch stacking, to get themselves into key places, because they had to keep doing it into the future.
Yeah, and I think that's what made Somyurek such a dangerous person, because he wasn't just acquiring quantity, he was acquiring quality power, people with useful influence, not just sheer numbers to be able to put on a ballot and sway something.
This Somyurek guy, he's the one that sort of teed off on Twitter, wasn't it? He was the one who was sort of
that's him.
quite active through everything that was going on, and throwing some spanners in the works in terms of Twitter coverage. And anyway.
And then he gave up because of the blowback against him. He just gave up at it eventually. At some point, he was just like, I'm done. I'm going to stop live tweeting from Ibac because it's just too much for him.
Yeah, I think he got a little bit upset because from day one, his counsel was in there, so they could cross-examine any witness that that basically gave evidence against him. You know, he was allowed to cross-examine. And what happened was that after they finished his testimony, he had questions, and they brought him back the next morning, which interrupted the start of the day for the next witness, and they started sliding on the schedule. So they basically said to him, yeah, look, you can still cross-examine people, but you have to wait until all the witnesses are finished. And then, you know, if you need to speak to any, we'll call them back. Because not everyone's been released from their summons, their IBAC summons. And I think for the most part, those people are ones that Somyurek's lawyer is going to want to cross-examine at the end of it. But he got quite shitty about that because he wants to clear his name on the spot. So he's he's a bit shirty. He feels like, you know, his rights have been denied and all this other crap. He's an incredible character. He's, you know, got more front than Myers.
So then technically, who is running the IBAC? So just for clarity for people, the IBAC is an independent inquiry body into the corruption, correct?
Yeah, that's right. IBAC is independent, broad-based anti-corruption committee because, you know, why not? And ICAC was taken. And I'm not exactly sure about the structure of like who's running it at the moment. Like the commissioner, I'm not sure if he's been the commissioner for a long time and he's going to be for a long time. But he's certainly the commissioner, at least for these hearings. And he appoints counsel to interrogate people basically on his behalf. And then the witness is allowed to have counsel there as well to consult, because there's it's a little bit different to court proceedings in that like you have to be careful what you say. Like you're not allowed to announce that you've been summoned by IBAC. That's secret. And you're not allowed to name names of people who've given evidence to IBAC because they have, you know, strict anonymity provisions to prevent blowback on whistleblowers, because it's basically a whistleblower-fed organisation.
So it's federally funded then. So the federal government is who runs.
No, it's state funded.
Okay, state funded.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And Dan's been a bit of a bloody miser as well, cutting them back, and so I don't think they have a lot of operatives, and they also have very limited power compared to ICAC anyway, because they can only investigate police and politicians, and only for serious corruption. So they won't investigate them for minor corruption. So straight away, it's almost got to be systemic for it to be considered serious. So, you know, one person doing one thing, they may not investigate it unless they get, you know, evidence that, yeah, maybe this person's involved another person, or they're being pushed from higher up. So it's a reasonably high bar to get an IBAC investigation started. This one, allegedly, well, Dan likes to claim credit for it, but I think they would have been investigating regardless, just based on what happened and, you know, within the media. That should have been enough to get them engaged.
Well, I think what the advantage here they have is they have the media on side. It's not some murder conspiracy. You've got 60 Minutes and The Age, who carried it. They were involved first. They were doing it in 2020. And I guess do you want to talk about a second about, you know, the early blowback from Somyurek and the accusations by him and Garotti of racism, because that was at the same time. That was June 2020. So that would have been when they had the BLM protests. So I want to talk briefly about that and how they played that into it, because I know that was a big defense they were relying on early on, is because they played the race card and said, well, you know, because there were investigations into Garotti and Somyurek and the Somali committee, the Somali Council as well, and they basically played the race card for defense.
That was absolutely shocking. So I'm just trying to find. I kept some detailed notes about what that letter was. Just bear with me for a sec. That was like really bad. Let me see if I can find it.
While you're looking that up, I just want to mention that for those that listen and don't know, IBAC is the Victorian version, and ICAC is the New South Wales version. So, like for example, I'm in WA, so we have a completely different system as well. It's all just different names that are getting thrown out for different states.
So I've got the transcript of the phone conversation between Garotti and Somyurek. I'll just pull that up on the screen for a second because I think that's really important. This is all public knowledge. This is all public.
If that made the transcript, that's what I was.
Yeah, that was put out by The Age, who are investigating this. So yeah, so here we go. So we've got Rick Garotti, saying that again. It was the idea of using Black Lives Matter as a defense, basically, for what they were doing, saying, you can't call us out for it because, literally because they played as I said, they played the race card here. I guess that last quote there from Somyurek is very important. You tend not to want black people to be involved in politics. You seem to, you just go racism on them. So basically, the idea of,
what the fuck?
Basically, the idea was, the conservative right is being racist because, as I said, that was the exact same time as the BLM protests in Australia and around the world. So it was right. So that they could basically, hint at it being the result of the blowback against the BLM protests and use that as a defense and really to call out the media for it, which is, I think, ridiculous. They went, okay, we'll do anything we can to defend ourselves, and this is where they went.
Yeah, and if you actually heard the phone call, because they actually played the intercept during the hearing, and it was very casual and methodical and plotting. It wasn't floated as like, oh, well, we could try this. They knew what they were doing and they knew it would work, or at least they hoped it would work. It was it was pretty bad. It didn't play well at all. I think that was because like the Garotti, he was like. He was doing everything he could to play down his role. Oh, I wasn't that important. I wasn't that involved. I wasn't that well respected. But, as the testimony came out, it became quite obvious that not only was he quite a big player, he over-talked himself within Labor about what he was, and he obviously had ambitions to go way further than he already had. So, he really tried to sell himself one way to the commission and the opposite way to Labor, and they burned him eventually. They just had too much evidence on him of him claiming to be a player and, saying stuff that you wouldn't say if you weren't a key operative, and that sort of thing.
Well, he was Garotti's counsel, and Somyurek was Minister for Local Government. So basically, Garotti could try and put himself in a place of being, the go-between between the Somali community group and the Labor MPs. Garotti could basically, because was it in his council district?
Yes, it was.
Yes,
and because they were registered in Heidelberg, because it came out during the hearings. They were asking him how many membership forms he took and so forth, and they said, how much attention did you pay? Didn't you notice all these new membership forms coming in with PO Box 82 Heidelberg on them? Oh, I didn't really know, And then they said, okay, so here's the grant application for Sakov. Did you notice that PO Box 82 Heidelberg's on there as well? So they were basically registering members with the address of the post office box of Sakov as their mailing address. So it's like that just stands out as scam. So
basically, you keep mentioning the Somali community. Is this so? Basically, what you're saying is that these guys hijacked a minority group and used them to try and gain extra power within their party. Is that what the sort of accusation is?
Yeah, like they found a key player within the community, and this seems to be a pattern that's been repeated by some of the other ministers. They would get a key player within a migrant community and assign them as a captain, and then they would be looked after. Now, how the looking after usually came about was that each MP has an allowance of like 1.5 or 2 electoral staff per week for their officers. And what they would normally do is hire one person who was the lieutenant organising all the captains and all the branch stacking activities and so forth, and also doing constituent work as well, because, you know, there's legitimate work that they have to do. But in a lot of cases, I'd say that was not the majority of their work. I'd say the majority of their work was factional work. And these other allowances would get farmed out to these captains or the captain's daughter or, you know, an uncle or something. And in a lot of cases, these people didn't even show up to the office. They just took the cash. And that was how they kept the captains online, so they would continue with all of the activity that was required to do branch stacking. Because there's a lot of it's not all year round, it's not all the time, but like you have to collect a membership renewal form because they're non-genuine members, so they're not going to get it in the mail, fill it out, put their money in and hand it in. They're going to open it and go, oh yeah, the captain will collect that, you know. And in some cases, they were getting these forms sent or collected from head office, bypassing the actual individual, the non-genuine member. You know, they were like taking that mail section out of the loop, and they were collecting the forms directly, particularly with the ballot form for the voting.
Plus, as well, you're talking about a very small community within Melbourne. There's not a massive Somali community in Melbourne, so of course they're all going. You know, they're not going to want to rat on one another, and they keep it like within the community. So that community bond being there already, like they trust one another. You know, you don't let down your brother, you don't let down your uncle. It's all that big family mindset, and then the Labor can basically play on that. And then basically ensure loyalty by using that community
so basically
bond
they've hijacked
to their own benefit
to do what they want.
Yeah. So I think
also they were able to piggyback that to get more members connected. You know, do you know someone else who wants to be a non-genuine member? You know, probably
you then add the entire family into the group. Basically, go family group by family group, bringing them all into the party, because you got MPs that were spending tens of thousands of dollars. Who was it? It's like one of the MPs, was it Kairos? Who was it $33,000 was given by Kairos?
Kairos is the one where I've heard like big numbers, and it seems like Ibac's got the receipts for them. In Garotti's case, and I think Burns' case, they said a few thousand, and then they kind of dragged 5,000 out of them, although it may not have been 5,000 every year. But it seems like if you don't contribute 5,000 a year, you're not going anywhere. You know, it seemed like that was about the level you were expected to. That's like your membership to the faction is $5,000 worth of fake members, you know, and so in some cases they were probably genuine members that were getting paid for. They're like, oh, you know, he's been around a while, he can't pay, but you know, he's loyal, so we pay for his membership. They probably weren't all bullshit members, but there definitely seemed to be a price of admission to get anywhere into the upper circles, and if you wanted to go anywhere.
From what I've heard from it, Byrne was branch stacking since the turn of the century. Yeah, he was spending at least $2,000-3,000 a year since the turn of the century, for branch stacking. He was elected 90.
Yeah, he's been around a while.
99, and since then he was 98, 99, and since then he's been branch stacking to keep himself in the position.
Yep.
Is that then using taxpayer money? Is that the dollars that they're cycling through? Like, I know if you get elected,
that's all taxpayer money.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two aspects to that. The thing that the commission is really, really laser focused on is how much time public servants were spending doing factional activities, because that is 100% straight up theft. That is not allowed, and it's pretty goddamn obvious that should not be allowed, because it enables an unfair advantage to the incumbent government because they've got more MPs. So they've got more of these staff. So, I mean, even a smart child should be able to work out that's probably not, it's not fair. You know, it means that the team that's won, it's like the home, you know, the home grand final in footy or in cricket. It's an advantage to the team that won the last time. And
Yeah,
it's a privilege in sport, and people understand it. But in politics, it's like, no. Politics, it matters. That stuff matters. You know, like if your team lost and they would have won at home, well, you're going to be sad for a year, but you didn't lose any money. You didn't have any rules changed that hurt you. You know, it's like it's something that's basically without consequence except for feelings. But politics, you know, changes stuff. So that needs to be fair. It's like the law. You know, that needs to be fair. You can't have different people getting different verdicts for the same crime when the circumstances are largely the same. So that to me is something that, like, you know, you shouldn't even really need to be told that in an induction to working for an MP. You should instinctively know that that's bad. And a lot of most of the witnesses, probably with the exclusion of Byrne was kind of on a, you know, he was like he was in a confessional booth, you know, all day. He wasn't really. The only thing I was a bit sus about on Byrne was when he was trying to make out Somyurek was all bad and he was kind of scared of him and stuff. I was like, yeah, that I don't know how genuine that is. And to be honest, I don't know that it mattered terribly much because the detail he was providing was enough to say, okay, there's a crime, you know. So I didn't see that as, like, at least to the commission anyway, it's not terribly relevant. It's an interesting talking point. And it's interesting if you're a political junkie, but if you're a crime investigator, it wasn't really, you know, didn't have a lot of merit in it, that kind of wondering. So, yeah, I sort of, it was interesting, but I don't think it changed circumstances terribly much in terms of what crimes have been committed.
Well, even then, I don't buy Burns saying that it was all Somyurek being a bully, because, as I said, Burns been doing this for 20 plus years, so he can't be saying that, you know, it's all Somyurek's fault because he was doing it first. So
yeah, but Somyurek is a bully. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, well, he was bullying.
His demeanor, and he was involved in a punch up in Parliament as well. A few years back, something I can't remember.
Very aggressive person, because he was threatening staffers and saying, you know, if you don't, like, basically to make people loyal and not make staff rat out on what was happening. He was saying, you know, if you know, go and leak anything, you won't be involved in, you can't be pre-selected, or the candidate that you work for can't be pre-selected. So really using that carrot and stick approach, except there was no carrot, only a stick. It was more of a whip anyway. So
yeah, so I think in terms of using government money directly to pay for memberships, that hasn't really been rock solid proved, or they haven't, you know, established that at great length. But you can also argue, well, some of your salary you don't deserve, and you use that to pay for memberships. So that's effectively, if not technically, using public money to pay for memberships, because some of that salary is not deserved. You should have paid that back because you didn't do the hours. So you can make that argument, but when it comes to the grants, I'd be shocked if some of that money wasn't absolutely used to pay for memberships. And because it was all done in cash, it may have been that you know, guys like Garotti was saying to Harako, well, mate, we just you know, got you a $75,000 grant, and I noticed you've got a new car, so I presume you helped yourself to most of that. So how about you bloody kick $5 grand my way, so I don't have to pay out of pocket, my own pocket, for your members who you're bringing in? You know, why don't you pay for them? But I'll get the money and pay for them, so it looks like me, so I'm taking the credit. So, you know, a lot of this stuff would have been done in cash, and it's probably very hard to trace. You know, even IBAC's got a few powers, you know, similar to the police, but when it's cash, you know, if you don't have recordings or emails or text messages admitting to it, it's pretty hard to prove that it went down, isn't it? So
it's kind of ironic considering the cashless welfare card has now been touted around again. So,
yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
one
so
thing
I
did
think for the majority of the outrage over the use of public money is time. It's the same as red shirts. They were borrowing staff basically that they were not entitled to use. And also possibly constituent matters were getting put on hold because they were too busy to deal with them. And that's pretty appalling too. But yeah, it's really more of a theft of staff hours that's gone on, and plus the grants. But that seems to have been done by the team captains, and that may have been deliberate so that they could put a layer of separation in between the MPs and their staff and the grants. They may have not been. They may have been smart enough to realise that's really dangerous. If we directly skim off that, that's dangerous. So let's promise these guys we'll look after them for bringing members, but we'll say, hey, you've got to pay for the memberships, but your reward is you'll get this job and we'll help you get grants for your community, and you can skim them as much as you want, but that's on you. It's hard to know exactly what kind of level of cooperation went on there. There was probably a lot of whatever you do, I don't want to know about it. We've given you the money, you spend it how you want.
So
probably weren't too many questions asked.
So where are we now with IBAC? It's like, are we nearing exposing everything, or are we nearing the end of it, or is there still quite a lot still to come out?
It's really hard to say because they're very secretive about who's going to be interviewed. Like if they released the whole witness, yeah, that's about right. If they released the witness list for 5 weeks right up front, it would have been a lot easier to see where they're going. Everybody wants to know, is it going to bring down Dan? And unless somebody from the moderate right, who's his opposing faction, dobs him in for something, it's not going to directly touch him. Now, the Commissioner and the counsel assisting Carr quite often ask the witnesses, and was this going on in all other factions? And what are you aware of the socialist left doing the same thing? And for the most part, they say along the lines of, well, I don't have any direct evidence, but I assume it was because everyone else was doing it. So it's almost certain that what's going on is repeated on the other side of the fence as well in Dan's faction. But whether they're going to interview anybody from the socialist faction, whether it's a staffer or an MP, I have no idea. I really don't. It's not clear at all from where they're going. What they seem to do with the way that they're presenting witnesses is that they're targeting one MP at a time, and they're calling witnesses who put the next witness right in the shit. So they're in a really awkward place, like they can't get out of stuff. They make it really awkward for the next person to be able to defend themselves. And that's because they're sort of picking people higher up the chain with more dirt attached to come after the earlier ones. So they push the earlier ones to try and, get the dirt on the next one, as well as, what they've done themselves. But yeah, they're trying to lay the ground to make it very awkward for the final witness of that associated with that MP to be able to lie. They make it very difficult.
So is there any word of this going to Dan Andrews' level, or is it because he's socialist left, not moderate right? But is he involved in any? Oh, wait.
Look, I'd say he's probably done the same thing. There's rumours that he did a deal to stop factional fighting, and I don't know what the details of that deal are. I'd be shocked if he didn't stack branches himself, because it's been going on since before he joined Parliament. Now, the thing is, if anyone's got dirt on Andrews, it's probably Adam Somyurek, because they were in the same area. So he may have spoken. So they, you know, when they have meetings, like a meeting for the area where they pre-select people out there, everybody turns up to, you know, to fight over who gets pre-selected for that seat. So they're either going to turn up and have a, you know, an angry bit of vote about it, or they're going to do some kind of backroom deal where they say, well, look, we'll let your candidate have this one, but we want our candidate to have that one. And also it's a bit more complicated than that, because, like, say you're going against a Green in a seat that you want to win, you're probably going to be going for the socialist left candidate to try and steal votes away from the Green. Whereas if you're in a safe, if you're in a close seat, Liberal incumbent, you might be looking more at the moderate right candidate, because they'll be able to, you know, tempt a bit more votes away from the Liberal candidate that's there. So, you know, I don't think that it's always going. And I think that's why they have the Public Office Selection Committee, which gets involved in every single pre-selection, because they probably have a better big picture of, yeah, look, you might be owed that one, but this is the better candidate because of who we're up against. And I'll tell you what, we'll give you this one over here. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of wheeling and dealing done, but at some point, you know, Andrews and Somyurek must have been doing this wheeling and dealing stuff together. And if there's anything improper happened then, or possibly even someone, you know, that Somyurek had to deal with from that faction as part of these discussions, may have, you know, let something slip. Somyurek may have even been spying on them, because at the end of the day, they're enemies within the same party. So Somyurek may have dirt that he's collected via illegal recordings and anything. You know, I wouldn't put anything past him, really. And he may be just biding his time for when he wants to play that card, because you play it 4 weeks before the election for maximum impact if you've got something juicy, you know, because they can't recover from it by then. It's too late to get the spin doctors fired up. So it might be that Somyurek is the one that potentially could really, like, bring Andrews down, you know, like nail him to the cross. There's enough dirt that's come out already that in a normal environment with a fair media, they'd be calling for Andrews' blood, because they say, well, you were either involved in this because all we've heard is that this is rife through the Labor Party, or you're the only one that didn't know it was going on. Now, how can you be the only one that didn't know it was going on? You've been the leader of Labor for 10 years. So you're either not in command of your own ship, or you're a part of the pirate squad. Which is it? You know, and it's very difficult to, you know, reasonably argue your way out of that position. But there's not many journalists that are smart enough and capable enough, or that he'll appear in front of, that he can get pinned down in that corner and have to fight his way out.
I'd definitely say that Andrews has to have tabs. He'd be keeping tabs on Somyurek. Probably since the Diminy Paul incident would be just that's more of a minor issue. But for those who aren't over Victorian politics, Somyurek stood down in 2015. First from his ministerial role as Minister for, I think, Small Business. Was he Minister for Small Business? He stood down and then resigned from Parliament altogether, and had to have a by-election for his seat, because he was bullying his chief of staff, Timothy Paul. So I would fully expect that Andrews to be kicked, because Somyurek returned 2018 to again return to the position of Minister for Small Business. So I would probably say that Dan Andrews has been keeping tabs on him at least since then, because he doesn't want another scandal like that. So Dan Andrews would have to know what's going on. He'd have, because even though he's socialist left, right, Dan Andrews.
Yep.
He's not Labour right. Yeah. Even though he's in a different faction, he'd have to be keeping tabs on Somyurek, because Somyurek could be a thorn in his backside, basically.
Because but I also think that, like, Somyurek has so much power that, like, I think, you know, he would have been able to push that, okay, I'll bow out for now because I'm an embarrassment, but I expect to return. You know, I think he probably has that much power that he would have, you know, been able to make that demand or have that expectation and make it happen.
Well, until he resigned in 2020 to Wayne Swan, who who's the president of the ALP at a national level, he had two ministry positions. He was local government and small business. So if he's holding two portfolios, he has to be a major player. He's not some, random backbencher in there. He would have to have significant influence. He'd probably be a shaker and mover, I'd even say, in Labor.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he had ambitions to get into the the national executive and be permanently employed without all the voting rubbish, or whether he had ambitions to go federal. I'm not really sure, but I mean, the guy got a lot of ambitions. He loves power. He was he's a very good networker too, from what I can imagine, because he had Garotti was kind of his northern henchman. He was involved in several other areas in the north, and he was reporting to Somyurek, about the moderate rights activities and so forth up there, and planning branch takeovers in the northern suburbs with him. So Garotti was a fairly significant person in Somyurek's network, it seems, from what's come out so far.
Yeah, I think that because he's to have those, I think you're right there 100%, because he has those connections to, talk to at least two other MPs in the lower house, plus a councillor. And, he's upper house himself. So that's basically all three levels, upper house, lower house, local government, that he's got, I guess, connections to.
Yeah, and one thing I wasn't aware of was the council grants. I've known councils are dodgy for ages, because you just think, well, gee, state politics is dodgy. Council must be just ridiculously dodgy, because the level of talent's a lot lower the further down the political tree you go. But I didn't realise they were milking grants, and also above that at the state level it seems they were directing grants, and at the very least they were providing their favoured organisations with inside information to help them be more likely to get grants. That's probably the most generous description of what was going on you can give them, if there wasn't outright corruption of the grants process. That I'd say that's, at least where that was going. And that's unethical, whether it's illegal or not, or whether it breaks some rule. I don't know. I imagine it does, because, it's the fairness thing. The grant should be awarded on merit, not on who you know. So I'd imagine it breaches some kind of parliamentary rule, if not the law. And Martin Pakula's name actually got dropped. It only got mentioned once, but it was regarding a particular grant they were trying to organise. They were talking about, I'll have a chat to Pakula and see what we can arrange there. So I don't know whether he's off the hook, or he possibly has been interviewed over that. I don't know.
Now, Pakula, he's west. He was upper house in the west, right?
I can't think. Where's Pakula? I don't know. He's blocked me now. I can't check him.
I'll check myself. I'm sure he was west somewhere, because he was opposite of Somyurek geographically. I'll check that up now for you. But yeah, no, I think that there has to be how deep does this corruption go is the question here. How corrupt is Labor? We're seeing all these people being mentioned left, right, and centre.
Yeah, there was a couple of other names that got dropped. One was I'm not exactly sure how to say it. Kaushalia Vagala, I think. She's an upper house Indian MP, and she's like the Indian captain, it seems. They've got the Indian community. There are a couple of Indian guys that sort of got her in, and then they expressed an interest in getting in themselves. So there's a lot of ethnic factions amongst the factions, so to speak. Where they very tight knit communities. And she's definitely been interviewed by IBAC, because they read part of her testimony to one of the other witnesses, where they confronted her because her husband's been working for one of them, and they said something along the lines of, so on the face of it, you would have to agree, wouldn't you, that it looks like your husband has sent one work email for the entire of 2020. She said, oh, yeah, I guess it does look like that.
I've got the information for you. So he was Western Metropolitan Region, so the opposite side of Melbourne to Somyurek, and then he moved to Lower House, Lyndhurst, and Keysborough.
Yeah, I was pretty sure he was an MP. Yeah.
I just want to briefly go back. You mentioned the red shirts before. Do you want to quickly explain who they are? Because just to clarify things for people who aren't, all over Australian politics.
Yeah, sure. The commissioner brings this up quite a lot. He seems to be personally almost offended by the whole red shirts saga, and I'll unpack that a bit because it makes sense. But basically, the red shirts was something that happened in the 2014 state election when Daniel Andrews came to power, and the red shirts were basically Labor volunteers, and they'd go and do door knocking and campaigning, and I think they probably had vote cards and stuff as well on election day. But the focus of that investigation was on the lead up to the election, because Labor were forging timesheets of these people, so they were using key electoral office staff to go and do campaigning on their behalf, and they were forging their timesheets saying that they were actually working in the office doing constituent matters and so forth. And the Ombudsman investigated, and there's something along the lines of $388,000 of public service time was misappropriated by Labor to do election campaigning, which it's not a lot of money, but the principle is appalling, because that could have swayed a lot of votes, so they were basically buying votes with public money, like electoral votes, not internal ALP votes. This is like, serious votes. And they also spent, I think, $1 million fighting an investigation. The upper house wanted to investigate it, and they had the numbers, and they spent $1 million going to the High Court, I think, trying to prevent that investigation happening. And it happened eventually, and the Ombudsman cost like another $250,000. So the bill for that was well over $1 million, even though it was only like $400,000 was involved. And eventually, Labor paid the money back. Said, "Oh, sorry, we misinterpreted the rules," and it's like, well.
So it's very ambiguous.
Even people who didn't have a copy of the rules probably could have worked out that was wrong. Because
it's against guidelines.
How much of this did the opposition do? Oh, well, none. Oh, well, you had an unfair advantage then, didn't you?
It is outlined in the rules that you can't be an elected officer and then go, if he's working for an MP, and then go and put on, party shirts, which is for Labor is a red shirt, hence the term.
Yeah, that's
you can't be going and doing that in campaigning. Plus the taxpayer money.
It's like the police. The police are supposed to be independent of the government of the day. They're supposed to have nothing to do with the party. Yeah, well, there's another story.
Melbourne's police are basically
back a long time.
Yeah. Anyway, boys, I'm gonna have to bail because of the time zones. But thank you, Polly. It was good chatting with you, mate.
Yep.
Thank you for
good to catch
clearing that stuff up for us. And cheers, Libs. I'll catch up with you guys again soon.
Sure thing.
Cheers, mate.
So from memory, we've been 20, maybe 24 MPs that were benefited from the red shirts campaign.
I think there were 21.
That rings a bell.
I think the amounts are in the thousands each, because there was a lot of them. I think it was like 2,000-3,000 at the low end, and maybe 10 to 15 at the high end for certain MPs. And of course they all denied it. And then Andrews.
These are all marginal seats, though. These are all marginal seats. That amount of money would make a difference.
I think the marginal seats probably got the most money, for sure. That's probably explains why the amounts were varying. But also, I believe they pulled people out of one MP's staff and put them in another MP's electorate. I don't think it was just campaigning for their own member. I think they spread them around. They pulled as many people as they could. That's why, I think there will be some people who were in safe seats who got caught up in red shirts because they pulled 2 or 3 people from a safe seat and put them into an unsafe seat or a winnable seat. And I think they basically just pulled as many people as they could, and then once they had the resources, they spread them where they wanted them. I don't think they campaigned for their own member 100% in all cases. I think there was a bit of mix and match went on there.
Yeah. Now, am I correct in saying that that went to the High Court?
I think it might have or was it the Supreme Court? But it went through like at least 2 or 3 stages of getting got fought by the Andrews government to try and deny the investigation.
Because that was surprising, because didn't the Greens, even the Greens were like against Labor, which is surprising because usually Greens and Labor work together, but even then Greens are like.
I think because they didn't benefit from it. Like Labor basically cheated on everybody by doing that. Yeah. So I think because I think everybody the motion was pissed off.
The upper house motion, I think, was put through by the Greens leader. Name escapes me. But from memory, like every party except Labor was opposed to it, like because Greens get preference deals, but even then they were like they still lost primaries. Even though they had preference deals, which got them seconds and thirds, they lost primary votes.
Yeah. I don't know how you could be in Parliament and outside of Labor and not be pissed off when you found that out. Like, it's just straight up cheating, It's just disgusting. And, and the thing is, like, you get in and then you change the rules and make that not illegal. Well, now you did something illegal. And now it's not illegal anymore, and you can do it like that. That's not what happened. But like those kind of people should be prevented from having power at all costs, because God knows what they'll do once they get in. And now we see it now. The pandemic bill. They just want ultimate power. Well, they can use that to shut down political dissent against them.
Basically, yeah.
Bill, and that is not a power that a civilized democracy should be allowing anyone to have for any reason, really.
We did a 2-hour pod. We did a 2-hour live stream and we broke down, just how bad that bill is. Well, it allows you to attack anyone for any characteristic or attribute, and it overrides the anti-discrimination laws as well, which is ridiculous.
No, it's insane, like they're just like, everything that's in our way, we'll just override it, it's staggering someone would even try it, it really is. It's so appalling. And
then get backed by Fiona Patten as well, which is
fucking bitch.
The fact that Fiona backed it is really...
I can't stand her. Every time, I have significant concerns about this legislation, and then on voting day, just rolls over like a dog, Rub my tummy, Dan. Rub my tummy.
I think the only thing that I liked about her was that she was against Dan Andrews in the ICook saga.
Yeah, but even then, if you knew all about that, there were times when you're just going, fucking typical. Like she was shutting down the Libs from trying to get at information. She was a couple of things, like what'd she say, like the biggest free kick she gave them was, look, I think we can all agree that photo's been doctored,
well,
and apart from that, she was being fair-ish but absolutely Labor leaning when she wasn't.
Well, I've got one last question for you.
To put in charge of that, definitely.
No, I've got one last question for you about this, about Ibac, and then you want to talk briefly about ICook as well, because that's the other
sure.
The other drama that's been
today, actually, which is quite interesting. Every time I visit it, there's something new, and it's like,
because it was the major story, and then it's been then Ibac replaced it as the main story in Victoria.
Yep.
So the last question I had for you was one name. So we spoke briefly about the Indian MP and Martin McCullough, having their names brought up. I wanted to ask you about Luke Donolan. Because he resigned over this, but he hasn't been front and centre, but he resigned.
The first day? Yeah, I think he got brought up on the first day in Burns.
Because he resigned really early on. He resigned on the 11th, the first day, because Byrne was in on the 11th.
Yeah, I'm sure it was the first day.
IBAC.
So I almost forgotten it. It was like so far back in my mind. But yeah, he got sort of, you know, he got put squarely in it as like as a player, and you know, he either had to resign or face the media and just get hammered. You know, so I think he realised, I'm going to get hammered and resign. I might as well just resign. You know.
Well, because I was talking before about, you know, how all these ministers had key roles that allowed them to do this. That he's Minister of Disability and Aged Care. So how does he fit into this? Has there been much of an investigation into him, or is he just a minor figure on the sidelines?
Look, I don't know. So the thing is, you don't always know whether he's been interviewed by IBAC before or after he was named, because they don't release transcripts of anything that's not public. And basically, the only way you'll find out is if his interview gets mentioned by the commissioner in the final report after everything else is finished. So, you know, they play their cards very close to their chest. They're completely opposite to ICAC in some ways, and that's one of them. You know, they operate under, you know, a shroud of mystery almost, and they're not public. There's a couple of aspects where I think, for mine anyway, the perfect anti-corruption body would be halfway between IBAC and ICAC, and the secrecy is one of them. I think ICAC shoot their mouth off too much, and IBAC is too secretive, and I'd like both bodies to be somewhere a bit in the middle. And also find that ICAC's a bit sensationalist. You know, like some of the Gladys stuff, it's like, I've sort of listening to it, but it's like, it comes out like Days of Our Lives, you know, and IBAC is far more sort of methodical and interested in finding out facts. You know, they're far more interested. You can tell by the way every time the misuse of public money, public time comes up, they suddenly get very interested in that, and like they're documenting hours on a secret notebook that you can't read. You know, like they seem very interested in the amount of time that's been wasted doing factional work. You know, they always harp on it. They ask for estimates, and if a witness says one thing and they have evidence the other way, they always confront them and get them to admit that the real story resembles what evidence we've got, which we just showed you. You know, they're very specific about identifying that public time, and I think that's the commissioner seems very upset that after the Red Shirts investigation, where it was clearly identified that this tactic of using public time for party business is clearly, you know, it's like it's not allowed. He seems like almost disgusted that there was a brief hiatus and then it was straight back to business as usual of doing that same tactic. You know, that's separate to the, you know, like the fraud and the grant allocations and stuff that's going on to enable the branch stacking. That issue, he's basically reminded nearly every witness of it, because he asked them. He said, well, after the Red Shirts investigation or the Ombudsman's report broke, did you have any conversations, you know, with your employer about how things would be different going forwards? You know, were there, you know, meetings held, you know, were guidelines revisited and so forth? And it seems like no, you know, there weren't. So
that finishes my questions on IBAC. I want to touch on ICook as well, though, because that's another major story that Ben Andrews has been more involved in than IBAC so far.
Absolutely. I think that I've thought this for quite a while, and so far IBAC hasn't changed my mind, is that if there's one thing that brings Dan Andrews down, I think it'll be Sluggate, because it involves him from when he was first in politics. And it's a really disgusting thing, because it's not Labor versus Liberal. It's Labor versus a private family business. You know, like the government has targeted a private enterprise and run them out of town, basically, and slandered them as well. You know, they put false allegations against them, and then, you know, when they were confronted with evidence, they withheld it, you know, which basically destroyed the business, because the business had show cause notices issued on their contracts, and they couldn't show cause because they couldn't exonerate themselves because the Department of Health was sitting on the information that would exonerate them. They had it and they didn't release it. So they basically, they put them out of business. And the, it seemed that you sort of think, why would they do that? And then, if you don't know about Community Chef, it seems a bit weird. But when you look into Community Chef, you see an awful lot of motivating reasons why they would want to get rid of ICook. I'll go through it very briefly because I've got some quick notes just for people who've got no idea about what Sluggate is. So firstly, what I'll say is if you are interested in finding out a lot more about Sluggate, the best thing you can do is check out some podcasts which have already been done. There's Andrew Rule, who's the Underbelly author, and he's got a podcast called Life and Crimes, and he's done 2 episodes on it, one called A Slug in the Guts and When the Slug Turns, which is an update. And then there's also the Rogue Bogues podcast by Andrew Bogut. He's got some podcasts called In Conversations, and he's done 2 of those, an initial one and an update, and you'll find them with ICook Foods attached to them. And also the Discernible podcast has had Ian Cook on at least twice to talk about it. And if you want to find out in detail, you've got to listen to a podcast where Ian Cook himself is discussing the issue, because he's right across every single part of it. It's his business, and he's a really smart, really, really pissed off guy. And you hear not just the details, but the passion. And he's able to put together the conspiracy that he was run out of business deliberately by politicians, and he's able to supply very good reasons as to why they might try something like this, which, it seems a bit risky, but there was a lot to gain, as it turns out. So we cover ICook Foods. Where's my notes?
Well, I've got the incriminating picture. If you need to bring that picture up right now.
Yep. So it was started by Ian Cook about 30 years ago. It's got 45 employees, including some with disabilities, and they specialised in providing hospitals and aged care with pre-packaged meals. And I think they were big in Meals on Wheels as well. So
yeah, and I think they were involved with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, because they're providing food to the vulnerable, if they were cowboys with food safety, I think it's very unlikely they would have lasted 30 years without getting shut down or having a major scandal on them. So, when he makes claims that he's, really solid on hygiene and following regs and so forth, I find that reasonably credible. Just because of the time frame, in 30 years, you think you would have, had a big food poisoning scandal of some kind, and especially when he's supplying in bulk to limited places, it would be easy to find him, track him down, and nail him. So, if they may have slipped at the time he was caught, that's definitely a possibility, but I don't think there's a culture of, shortcuts in this place, just looking at the history of it. And then you've got Community Chef, which was set up basically in competition with ICook Foods. They're doing similar things, Meals on Wheels, hospital and aged care stuff. And this was set up in 2009, 2010 by Anthony Albanese, who was the Regional Development and Local Government Minister at the time, and also Dan Andrews, who was the Health Minister in the Victorian Labor government at the time. So at the time, Ian Cook wrote to Albanese and said, you're going to kill private companies setting up this monster because, you can't lose. And Albo's written back, said, no, it's an infrastructure project. We're going to cooperate, so forth.
So Community Chef was government-backed enterprise, basically. So basically, it's going to get bailouts, and it can't fail economically because it's going to get all the government bailouts it needs to keep going and basically become a monopoly in the food industry.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not 100% sure on the financial structure of it. I believe it was owned by the Victorian government when it was set up, and then they they took grants along the way, and I think they gave out shares in the company. It was like, you know, capital raising type thing, because there's been, where's the money? 9 million from the feds, 6 million from the state government, 2.5 million from councils, 1.5 million from Hobson's Council, and
when you say feds,
I think federal Department of Health.
Yeah, is that both parties, or is that just Land to Labor, or did Liberals back them as well?
Federal government under Labor, I think.
Okay.
Because they were in until
so the Liberals aren't involved then.
No, not at all. They although some money may have gone from there, but it may have been, you know, like a legitimate thing that they did to all businesses in all states. You know, there may have been some grants. I'm not exactly sure. I don't have a breakdown on that. So then, initially ICook Foods lost some business, but eventually they got some contracts back, including Monash Council, who I think Monash were also a shareholder. But you've got the CEO of Dandenong Council was a board member of Community Chef, and the Dandenong Council are shareholders of Community Chef as well. So, and these are the guys who are in charge of policing health violations on all businesses, but I imagine they didn't police their own business terribly hard by the sound of it. So there were two... So what? Where was it? 2018. Yeah. So late in 2018, Community Chef and the people behind it started getting shitty at ICook Foods because they were taking all their business. And then in 2019, early 2019, there was a lady admitted to the hospital with listeriosis symptoms. It was assumed at the time she already had it. And I believe there may be some information released soon that proves that she did in fact have it before she was admitted on. I'm not sure about that, but something's coming out in the next week about the evidence that surrounds this case, because they kind of pinned her death on ICook Foods. And it turned out that they didn't supply any of the food she had at all. She was on a soft diet. The hospital prepared all the food, so she didn't actually eat any food from ICook Foods, but she was tested for listeriosis. They knew ICook Foods was the sole provider for hospital food, so they went down there, they tested, they found listeriosis. Now, the listeriosis was at 10 times below the safe level, but Brett Sutton has played the old, you know, with an abundance of precaution card and shut down ICook Foods.
So the health minister got involved then. So the Andrews was at the start as health minister, and now Brett Sutton's got involved as health minister?
As the Cho, he did this.
CHO. Chief Health Officer.
Or it might have been deputy at the time, I think, actually, because they mentioned to me that Sutton may have been promoted out of all this. Because I asked her, do you see him as a useful idiot or someone who was involved? And they said, look, you know, probably a bit of both. It's, you know, without him sort of testifying, they couldn't be specifically sure of what his involvement was. But there was information that was withheld for, was it 2 weeks and then another lot for 4 weeks. And they let their contracts lapse. So all the people that were contracted to have ICook Foods supply them basically cancelled their contracts because they, you know, they've got a contract. I don't know how long the contracts were, like 2, 3, 5 years, but there's obviously a get out clause. If you guys are shut down for food safety reasons, you've got 4 weeks to show us why we shouldn't cancel our contract without penalty. Otherwise, we'll cancel our contract without penalty. And so the Department of Health clearly knew that, and they held that information back and let the contracts lapse, and Community Chef picked them all up. And then once Community Chef got rid of ICook Foods, they were now a sole supplier, and they could access additional funds being a sole supplier. So they basically became, you know, like a bottomless pit of money that they could tap into. And the new thing that I've found out just today actually is that there are people that have seen the books of Community Chef, and they said it's quite clear that they were making profits off the food sales, but the company as a whole has never made a profit. They've lost something like $20 million over 10 years. They've never made a profit. And that's on top of having all this money pumped into it as well. So, you know, like they were making money from the food sales, blowing that oil and then blowing all this, you know, I think it's about 20 million all up that's been put in. And the suggestion is that they've been milking this and pulling money out and probably bloody buying fake memberships with it too. Who knows? But
wouldn't surprise me. That's all allegedly, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And it seems like this might be just red shirts all over again and branch stacking all over again, where they're pulling money out of public funds and using a clever scheme to disguise it, so it doesn't look like they're directly stealing. So if that's true, and there's proof of that, Dan's in big trouble. In fact, a lot of people are, and a lot of people will be going to jail because that's. So I'll
just pull up I'll pull up now the big bit of evidence in the case, which is this slug photo.
Sluggo. Yep. So yeah, apparently this photo was
taken. Apparently it's real.
There's two photos taken of it. One was taken by Michael Cook, and the other one was taken by Elizabeth Garlick. And apparently there's a piece of tissue in Michael Cook's photo, and there's not a piece of tissue in Garlick's photo. And when she arrived to do the inspection, she had pockets bulging with tissues, apparently. So possibly she had the slug wrapped in a tissue so that it wouldn't slime out and put a big stain on her pocket and draw attention to the fact that she's got something dodgy in her pocket. It seems to be the theory behind why there were tissues, and I don't think that's deniable either. I think they've got pictures where it's like you can see the pocket bulging in another picture.
I found a picture of it. Yeah.
So
I'll bring this one up now on screen. Apologies to all the audio listeners. But yeah, you can see diagonal left of the slug on the right is that bit of tissue. There's that white spot.
Yep.
I don't know if I can do anything to highlight it. But yeah, there is.
It's kind of southwest of the slug, isn't it?
Southwest,
right?
Yeah. So right there is where the bit of tissue is, and that's the this is the real photo supposedly. Wait, which one's the real one?
The one on the right's the real one, I believe. That was taken by Michael Cook. So
and
it wouldn't be a difficult Photoshop to do. It's only a tiny speck, and the pattern in the concrete's so random. You'd be able to just sort of make something up, and it would just look like rough concrete. So, and so apparently there was a whistleblower who's admitted that she saw that photo being doctored as well.
Yeah, I heard about that. That she saw it on the computer as she walked past or something like that.
And I think they pressured her to change her report too, which might have been the thing that broke her and made her go whistleblower.
So, am I correct in saying that the slug from the photo on the right was basically copied over to the one on the left, or how did that work exactly?
No, the one on the left has the piece of tissue removed from it.
Yep. So is the picture on the right not actually from the inside ICook, or
no? The picture on the right was taken by Michael Cook, who was supervising the inspector as she went around the factory, and he said she squatted down for about 17 seconds, and they've got camera footage. You can see she disappears, and she's reasonably large lady, so if she was up to something, the way she squatted down, you wouldn't have been able to see what she was
the
up
slug
to.
There.
So she squatted down, pulled the slug out, dropped it on the ground, and then picked up all the tissue, but missed a bit, and then said, "Oh, look, a slug," and took a photo of it. And then he's like, "Oh, what?" And so he came in and took a photo straight away as well.
Good job on him. Good save.
Yeah, he's a sharp operator. I think he may have been a bit suspicious on her, and I think they may have been a bit they probably felt the heat a bit from Community Chef, and knowing that there's they would have known that Donolan Council was a major shareholder and that the CEO of Donolan Council was on the board, so they would have probably been a bit, gee, this is a bit rough. We've got like a government competitor, and the bloody food police own this business. If they want to put us out, they would have been suspicious that, like, if these guys want to put us out of business, it's not hard. They'll just do it. They'll come up with something. So, we need to be on our toes if they try and pull anything. And I don't know if this happened before or afterwards. I only just found this out today as well. But Elizabeth Garlick, who's alleged to have planted the slug, apparently has had 2 complaints made against her from a KFC and a local kebab shop in the Dandenong Council area about evidence being planted during health inspections. So she's got a bit of form, this lady, and apparently she was hired as like a go-getter, a heavy hitter, gets the job done, brings people to justice kind of thing. She's got a bit of a reputation. The other thing is too that, and I believe Daniel Andrews changed this legislation. The council gets all the money from any fines that they get against, even though it's a state health law that they've broken, the council gets all the money for prosecuting health breaches. So you've got guys who are invested in a competitor and invested in prosecuting people. I mean, there's 2 conflicts of interest on top of each other, and the police had to be basically badgered into investigating this. Like, there's serious crimes have been committed here if everything Ian Cook says is true, and he's got an awful lot of evidence for most of what he's said, and he's got an awful lot of solid motive for everything else that he's said. There's probably jailable offences have been committed here, apart from the moral offence of putting a family business out of business and all its associated employees as well. And it just staggers me sometimes, the level of stuff that goes on in this state, and no one seems very interested in tracking down perpetrators.
So
suggests that there's very powerful people involved.
If this didn't go to IBAC, this went to Parliamentary Committee, right?
It's been basically, there's 3 separate actions that are coming out of this. One is a civil matter. The Cooks are suing. I'm not sure if it's the Victorian government generally or the Department of Health, but they're suing for like $25-30 million for material loss
of contract,
because they claim they were shut down invalidly, and the department didn't follow its own rules. And that one, well, I mean, they got the balance of probabilities there, so the chances of them winning that, I think, are pretty good, because the court's going to smell a rat when they see all the connections laid out. And they've got police are investigating now. That one's a mess. Like, they went to the police straight away. The police kind of bogged it down. They went to Dandenong Police and they said, "Oh, well, we're financially involved with the Dandenong Council. We can't investigate. We've got a conflict of interest." It's like, why are you involved with the council? Why? What are you why are the police financially involved with anybody? It's like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
So wait, the state police are involved with the council?
Yeah, I can't remember this is why you're better to listen to one of the podcasts with Ian Cook himself, because he's got all these little gems and tidbits, and especially with Andrew Rule, because Andrew Rule, being the underbelly guy, he was like really onto the the criminal side of it. What are the police doing? And I'll give you a quick. Oh, I've got a police here. Okay, yep. So a couple of ex-cops got involved. They spent 4 hours with him. Couldn't believe the story. And they handed it to Dandenong CIU, and then it got handed to Moorabbin CIU because, it's okay, Dandenong cops had conflict of interest due to work with Dandenong Council. So okay. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it seems that there's finances involved if they had to declare conflict of interest. Then it went to Moorabbin. The bloke went on leave. Then the bloke was going to send it back to Dandy, and then it's gone to someone else. And then they wrote to Patton, Shane Patton, and then it got a bit public, and Patton got asked about it, I think, on 3AW by Neil Mitchell, and then it sort of got another bit of life again, and it went to Casey Investigation Unit. asked for approval to proceed,
Shane's,
and
is
then
he,
it's died off
still
for 10
Chief
weeks,
Commissioner?
It's yes, he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think at the moment, I think they're still pushing. It's been stalled. It hasn't gone anywhere for a while, but it's still alive. The problem they're probably having is finding someone who's willing to push it forwards. It seems that most of the people that are really behind this are retired ex-police and ex-detectives, you know, because they're not sort of worried about losing promotions and stuff. And obviously the people that are in there now are very much worried about their careers and don't seem too keen in taking this on, because clearly you've got to go against Andrews, and Andrews owns the top echelons of the force. So you're going to run up against promotion roadblocks if you piss Andrews off. You know, they're not.
And so this is going through. So this is basically going through almost like private eye, as opposed to the criminal investigation unit, which is the CIU. So it's basically going almost private eye sort of stuff to get this resolved.
That's sort of certainly how it started. And it seems like there's been a bit of intervention from some of these people along the way to kind of keep it pushing and keep getting it moved, because it keeps getting dropped with a new mob, and it just stalls because there's no interest to pick it up and look at it because of what it is. It's it's a toxic, toxic case, really, because it involves politics. And like just the police having a conflict of interest with the Dandenong Council. It's like, well, I'll bet you that's not the only conflict of interest between police and a government, if that's the case. So, it's very stinky, and I think people are probably a bit scared because they know, like, the thing is, if there was nothing in it, they probably would have investigated it and just gone, yeah, look, it's a great story, but there's no evidence. It's never going anywhere. But there is evidence, and it is going somewhere, and that's why it's not being picked up, because whoever picks it up knows they're going to have a stinky prosecution that will end up in big names going down, in 12 to 18 months, and they know that they're going to be famous for bringing down some powerful people, and most people don't want to be remembered that way. I couldn't give a shit. I don't mind. I've got no power of iron, so I'm punching up, but some of these people, yeah, they'd be worried about some of the names and some of the dirt, and like it could blow up and pull red shirts back in the frame, and they might say, well, why were no red shirts charges ever lodged? It could blow up and encompass other issues, because if someone's going down, they may sing on something to do with Sluggate, something they know about something else, to get a lighter sentence. Because if they know whoever's going down is also guilty of something else, they might offer that and say, well, look, I know you're probably going to get this guy on this, but you can get him on this as well, but I want no jail, and I want to leave Australia, or, that something like that may happen.
So we've looked at the police, and we've looked at the civil court side of things, which can't really go anywhere yet. I guess it's a long drawn out process. Let's talk about finish up on talking about the third avenue here, the Parliamentary Avenue, and what's happened there, because there's been some really juicy stuff has come out of that investigation.
Yeah, I didn't get much on the first one. I watched the second one, and Ian Cook himself appeared at the second one, I believe, and he was very good, and he's like, and if anyone disagrees with anything I've said today, I'm ready at the drop of a hat to come back in and set them straight. He's so confident in his own story. He definitely feels aggrieved, and he feels like he's got a case to prosecute. But I think they picked up Sutton's, like, kind of lied to the inquiry the first time, or at least wasn't honest, and kind of played a bit dumb and about withholding the information regarding ICook Foods. Because what happened in between the first and the second one was that a fella called Ray Christie was sent to investigate the death of this lady with listeriosis who ICook Foods got pinged on, and ICook requested his report, and they got it 100% redacted, so they couldn't see anything. So they got a detective, Baker, who got involved, interviewed Christie, and they got all of his statement and found out what was in the statement that got hidden. And he knew that the hospital had provided all the food, because he dug into it and found out, yeah, okay, she's on a soft diet. She only gets food prepared, you know, by the hospital's kitchen. So he was aware of that, and that report got suppressed. So once they'd actually spoken to him, then that part of the story, which they, until that point, they didn't know, you know, that they'd been totally stooged and that there was evidence to exonerate them. And so that came out once the police got involved again. So it's such a grubby story, this one. It really is. But,
it's got the same corruption all over it.
Yeah, you know, you sort of think, well, you know, who was skimming off this company? You know, was it just the people working there? You know, with the board skimming off it? Was the council getting kickbacks? You know what I mean? And there's a lot of ways to get you know, kickbacks too. You just send a bill and for a service you never provide, and you know, keep the money, like they did with Labor did that with the printing rorts. That was a very clever small scale branch stacking scheme where they were people in the MP's offices were requesting printing services, and they'd ask for a sample so they could see what they were like before they placed a whole order. And they got sent the sample, and they got billed for the entire order, and they never ordered it. So there was a bill, product was provided. That was the end of the matter as far as public expenditure accountants were concerned. But they didn't know that it was only a sample that was provided, not the whole thing. And that money was taken by the printer and used to buy fake memberships for branch stacking. And I think some people actually went to jail over that one too. That was a while ago. But that was like a little mini red shirts.
Yes.
On its own. And I don't know that was, I think that was particularly sort of kept to a local branch. I don't think they proved that was going on all over MP's offices. I think that was just a particularly cooperative printer and they, you know, probably got on the beers one night and had a bit, hey, you know how we can rip money off, you know, and then that was that. And it was probably a little local power grab. I don't know that one was ever found to be a systemic scam that was pulled. It was just a one-off instance, I think. It was out at Western Suburbs, I think. I'm sure someone went to jail or got found guilty and got a big fine over that. There were about 3 or 4 of them got charged.
You know, it rings a bell up. Yeah, I think there was some serious punishment handed out because that went to court. I think I'm going to say criminal. I think it went to criminal.
I'm pretty sure
not a civil matter.
Yeah, it was.
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it went criminal.
Fraud or some kind of financial deception charge. You know, know a lot of the criminal ones, but not the financial ones. That's apparently when you do an accounting degree, about three quarters of it is law.
Yes,
fraud. All the you know the things you can get busted for you know counting.
Fraud would be more civil, but yeah, you're looking at you would be similar. Fraud is more civil, but at least that's up it is in Queensland. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the same down in Victoria. But there are definitely criminal law alternatives. Misappropriation of funds, for example, would definitely be one up there that they could bring a case in.
Yeah,
and it would not surprise me.
There might be some parliamentary ones as well. I'm not sure whether Parliament has extra laws about, you know, absconding public funds, or whether they just treat it as, you know, like a theft charge and throw it to the cops. I'm not sure.
It just it's hilarious to me that, you know, this is what happened. Like, we've got evidence of real corruption here, and the left is silent on it. But then when, you know, Scott Morrison, you know, he knows someone who's in the Hillsong Church who does something wrong. Apparently, Scott Morrison's involved in it. But when it comes to this, it's, you know, it's a murder conspiracy. I have heard people saying that, you know, all this branch stacking is a murder conspiracy, which apparently the IBAC is involved in murder conspiracy against Dan Andrews, who referred it to the police. Dan Andrews referred this to the police. So Ridiculous.
It's absolutely ridiculous. The left, like, you know, they want to compare cherries to watermelons every day. You know, that's why they can't meme. They have no sort of, you know, no idea of scale, you know, of offence. They can't, and it's because they don't have principles. You know, if you get a principle, you say, okay, well, this is exactly the same principle being violated here. Now all we need to do is to determine the magnitude of the violation, and then we can compare them. And then we can say, yeah, this person's really bad and this person's not so bad, because they've effectively done, you know, the same thing. But they just equate ridiculous things together. You know, like the whole De Brittany Higgins ones is a classic, because, you know, they're all upset. Oh, you know, this woman, she's got a rape allegation, and he should be stood down from Parliament. Blah, blah. It's like, yeah, so what? Bill Shorten had a rape allegation against him, and he didn't stand down from Parliament. And the victim's still alive, and she's still interested in justice. If the police could be bothered, you know, talking to her, but they just said, oh, he said, she said, too hard to prosecute. And it's like, well, that's probably how the Brittany Higgins one's going to go down. He said, she said. You know, it's going to be hard to get a verdict, and it's going to be really hard.
Oh no, there'll be a verdict
about it. You know, before even naming him. You know, like his lawyers are going to have a field day arguing trial by media. Even though he wasn't named, it doesn't matter, because now he is, and everyone knows who that bloke was that didn't used to have a name. They knew who he was. They just didn't know his name. Now they know everything. It's not some new guy. It's the guy they already had a mental picture of, the rapist of Brittany Higgins. You know, it just really shits me that. You know, like if you've got a legitimate beef and you go to a journalist before you go to the police, that to me just stinks straight away of a weak case. And it's like, you might have been wronged, but if you've got a weak case, you're not going to get a verdict, you know, that you want. And that's how our justice system's set up, because otherwise we'll throw everybody in jail over every little thing if we accept weak evidence. You know, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt.
Well, Bruce Leeman's just gone to... Actually, today he's been admitted to Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think he was in today. Yep.
Yeah, he was admitted to the Supreme Court today. But there's going to be a verdict because it's on the right, so there's going to be a verdict about that. But yeah, as you were saying, you know, if he's found not guilty, there's going to be so much defamation law and slander that's going to come out of this. It'll be ridiculous. Yeah, it's going to be a field day for lawyers.
Yeah, well, the book fee might get eaten up, that's for sure.
Yes.
But I just, I don't, you know, I'm not a barrister, but I don't like her chances of getting a verdict, because, you know, when you've got drunken people involved, you know, it's very hard to get a solid story. Like the defence barrister is going to tear her apart under cross-examination. He's going to make her eat her words a few times, you know. But I thought you said this earlier, you know, because her recollection is not going to be 100%.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming months.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like, you know, there's been a bit of hinting that maybe there was more than alcohol involved. You know, maybe he slipped her a Rohypnol or something. Although I think she's probably just really drunk. You know, but it's possible. But the thing is, that's why you go straight to the bloody hospital and you get a rape kit put on you. And then if there's anything there, you go to the police. You know, these people don't seem to understand that crimes need evidence, not stories. You can sell anything to the media with a story. You can't sell anything to the courts without evidence. They just, you know, they've seen trial by media and they think they know how it works. It's like, no, in court, the standards are 10 times higher than what the media needs to convict somebody. That's why we don't do trial by media, because their standards are bloody pathetic. And it depends on who's on trial as well. You know, that makes a huge difference. The courts don't care. They don't care who you are or what your name is. You know, all they care about is the facts of the case and the evidence that's available. And then how credible you sound when you're cross-examined. You know, they're the things that matter.